The world for 16-year-old Caleb Blackwood wasn't a world at all. It was a stable loft, a patch of hay that smelled of dust and horses in a town called Redemption Creek, a place that had long forgotten the meaning of the word. He was an orphan, a ghost, a boy who learned that the best way to survive was to become invisible. He mucked stalls, chopped wood, and ate scraps. He expected nothing and was never disappointed. His only escape was the prairie, the vast empty land that stretched out forever, a place as lonely as he was, and it was out there, miles from anyone, that his life was supposed to end. But it didn't. Instead, it truly began. The sun was bleeding out across the horizon when he saw her, kneeling by a creek, a Lakota girl with hair like a raven's wing, tracing the petals of a wildflower. The people in town spoke of the Lakota with fear and hatred, calling them savages. But Caleb, who'd only ever known cruelty from his own kind, he just saw a girl. Alone, like him. Finding a little bit of peace in a world that didn't offer much of it. He stayed hidden. He didn't want to scare her. Just watching was enough. Then he heard it. A low rumble that grew into a roar. Horses. 5 of them, coming over the rise at a dead run. He knew the riders, prospectors from town, fueled by whiskey and arrogance. They were hollering, whipping their mounts, a storm of stupid violence about to crash right over the girl by the willows. She looked up, her eyes wide with terror. A deer caught in the headlights of a freight train. She was trapped. Creek at her back, stampede at her front. Caleb didn't think. He just moved. He burst from the trees, a scarecrow of a boy moving faster than he ever had in his life. He hit the shallow creek, water exploding around his worn-out boots. He screamed, a raw, wordless sound that was swallowed by the thunder of the hooves. The ground shook. The air was thick with sweat and dirt. He reached her just as the lead horse, a monster of a bay, was about to crush her. No time to pull her away. He did the only thing he could. He slammed his body into hers, a desperate bony shove that sent her tumbling backward into the soft mud of the creek bank. He saw her shocked face for a fraction of a second. Then the world ended. The horse hit him like a battering ram. He was airborne for a moment, then slammed into the dirt. Another set of hooves crushed his back. He felt a sickening crack in his leg. Pain exploded behind his eyes. The world was just a blur of dark shapes and unbearable weight. He curled into a ball, his arms over his head, a final, useless gesture. A hoof caught him square on the skull, and everything went black. He woke up to pain, a living, breathing fire that was in every inch of his body. His head throbbed, his legs screamed, his ribs felt like shattered glass. He tried to move, and a wave of agony dragged him back under. The next time he surfaced, it was to the smell of wood smoke and something strange, something herbal. He forced his eyes open. They felt like they were glued shut. The world was a blurry, dim circle. He wasn't in the stable loft. He wasn't in the dirt by the creek. He was lying on soft furs. Inside a Lakota teepee. A small fire glowed in the center. The girl appeared above him. Her face was tight with worry. She saw his eyes were open and let out a shaky breath. She knelt beside him, holding a small wooden bowl, and said something in a language he didn't understand. Her voice was soft, but panic seized him. He was hurt, helpless, in the camp of the people his town called monsters. He looked into her eyes, searching for the monster, but he didn't see one. He saw gratitude. Then another shadow fell over him. A man, tall and broad, filled the entrance of the teepee. His face was a road map of hardship and strength, his hair streaked with gray. An eagle feather was tied in one of his long braids. His eyes were dark, piercing, and they looked right through Caleb. This was her father. This was the chief. The chief spoke, his voice a low rumble. The girl answered quietly. He turned his gaze back to Caleb. He spoke a few words in broken English. You are prisoner. It wasn't a question. It was a sentence. The warmth in the girl's eyes vanished, replaced by something cold and hard. The man, her father, Chief Chayton, stared down at him, his expression unreadable stone. The girl, Winona, didn't offer him the bowl. She set it down, just out of his reach. The simple gesture was more terrifying than any weapon. Caleb closed his eyes, the fire of his injuries matched only by the ice of his fear. He hadn't been rescued. He had been captured. The days that followed were a blur of pain and fever. His world was the fur bed and the painted hides of the teepee walls. His leg was splinted, bound so tight it throbbed with a life of its own. His ribs protested every breath. An old woman came and went, her face a mask of wrinkles. Istas, they called her. She forced bitter teas down his throat that made him gag, but they seemed to keep the fever from boiling his brain. She would clean his wounds with herbs that stung like fire, her touch efficient but not gentle. There was no kindness in her hands, only duty. Winona was always there, watching him. She never sat close. She just stayed in the corner of the teepee, mending a moccasin, her eyes constantly flicking towards him. When he was lucid, she would speak to him, her voice low and even. She wasn't trying to soothe him. She was questioning him. "Why you there?" she'd ask, using her few English words. "Why you watch me?" He'd try to explain, his throat raw. "I was checking snares." She would just stare, her expression unchanged. "You lie," she said one day, her voice flat. "No snares there. I looked." A cold dread washed over him. She was right. He had checked his snares miles back. He had just been walking, wandering. But how could he explain that to her? How could he explain a loneliness so deep it drove him to walk for miles just to feel the wind? It sounded like a lie even to him. "The men on horses," she pressed day after day. "You know them." "They're from town," he'd rasp. "Prospectors." "They are your friends," she stated. It wasn't a question. "No," he insisted, his voice cracking. They're nothing to me." She just shook her head slowly, a small, knowing smirk on her face. "You were with them. You were the scout. You led them to me." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. It was insane. It was impossible. But the way she looked at him, the cold certainty in her eyes. For a terrifying second, he almost believed it himself. Chief Chayton came every evening. He would stand at the entrance of the teepee, a massive silhouette against the dying light, and just stare. He never spoke a word to Caleb. He would just stand there, his arms crossed, his gaze heavy with suspicion. Caleb felt like an insect under a rock. He was being judged, and he had already been found guilty. One night, as he lay there, pretending to be asleep, he heard them talking just outside the flap. Chayton's low rumble, Winona's quiet responses. He couldn't understand their words, but he understood the tone. It was the tone of a verdict being delivered. He heard his name, or the closest they could come to it. Caleb. And then another word, repeated several times, a word that sounded like wasichu. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew it wasn't good. Later, when the camp was quiet, he managed to push himself up. His body screamed in protest. He had to know what was happening. He crawled to the teepee flap, his broken leg dragging behind him. He peered out into the moonlit camp. What he saw made his blood run cold. 2 warriors stood guard outside his teepee, their faces painted, their bows in their hands. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't a patient. He was a prisoner of war, waiting for his execution. The old woman, Istas, came the next morning with a bowl of steaming broth. It smelled different, sharper. He looked at it, then at her. Her face was impassive, but he saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Pity or satisfaction. He remembered the word from the night before. "Wasichu," he whispered, his voice hoarse. Istas froze. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She looked around as if to make sure no one had heard. She leaned closer, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. It means the one who takes the fat, a thief, a greedy one. She straightened up, her mask back in place. Eat, she said, pushing the bowl towards him. Chief's orders. He stared at the broth. Was it poisoned? A test? Was this his execution? A quiet death in a teepee, far from anyone who even knew his name? His stomach churned with hunger and fear. He hadn't eaten anything solid in days. He had to take the chance. He drank the broth. It was bitter, but it was warm. It spread through his empty stomach, a small comfort in his sea of terror. Nothing happened. He didn't die. But the fear remained, a constant companion. The days crawled by. His body was healing, but his mind was a wreck. Every shadow was a threat, every quiet conversation a death sentence. Winona continued her relentless interrogations. She wasn't just asking questions anymore. She was telling a story where he was the villain. "You came to our land," she said, her voice laced with venom. "You and the other Wasichu, to steal. You were looking for something, the yellow rock." "Gold?" he asked, confused. "I'm not a prospector. I own nothing." "You were the scout," she repeated, her voice like a hammer striking the same nail. "You found our camp. You saw me. You were going to signal them, but you were clumsy. You fell." This was their truth, the story they had built around him. In their version, he wasn't a hero. He was a failed spy. The shove that saved her life? In their eyes, it was just him stumbling, an accident that ruined his own evil plan. It was perfect. It explained everything. It fit their worldview, their experience with his people. And it was a death sentence. As his leg grew stronger, they allowed him to move. They gave him a crutch, and he hobbled out of the teepee for the first time. The bright sunlight was blinding. The entire camp stopped to stare at him. Men, women, children. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and pure, undisguised hatred. He was a monster to them, a symbol of everything they feared and despised. He saw the warriors practicing with their bows, their arrows flying with deadly accuracy. He saw the hunters cleaning their rifles. This wasn't just a camp. It was a military outpost. These people were on a war footing, and he was the enemy. He learned to be silent. He learned to keep his eyes down. He did the small tasks they gave him, hauling water, cleaning cooking pots, his movements slow and painful. He was trying to prove them wrong, trying to show them he was harmless. But it was useless. Their minds were made up. He overheard whispers. They were waiting. Waiting for what, he didn't know. But the feeling of impending doom was suffocating. One afternoon, Winona came to him while he was scrubbing a pot by the creek. She wasn't questioning him today. She was just watching him, a strange look on her face. "My brother," she said suddenly. "He was killed by your people." The words hung in the air between them. "I'm sorry," he whispered. It was all he could say. "They came in the night," she continued, her voice trembling with a rage she could no longer contain. "They burned our village. They shot everyone. Men, women, children. My little brother. He was only 6 years old. They shot him for sport." She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "So you see," she said, her voice hardening again. "We know what the Wasichu are. We know there is no good in you. You are all liars and murderers." She looked him dead in the eye. "And we know how to deal with murderers." She turned and walked away, leaving him by the creek, his hands shaking, the pot forgotten. He finally understood. This wasn't about him. Not really. He was just a canvas onto which they could paint all their pain, all their anger, all their grief. He was the stand-in for every white man who had ever wronged them, and he was going to pay the price for all of it. That night, the drums started, a slow, steady heartbeat that echoed through the camp. It was a sound that spoke of ritual, of judgment. He saw the warriors gathering around the central fire, their faces grim. Chaitin stood before them, speaking in their tongue, his voice rising and falling with passion. Caleb didn't need a translator. He knew what was happening. His trial was over. And tonight, they would carry out the sentence. They came for him just after moonrise. 2 warriors, their faces painted black and red, entered his teepee without a word. They pulled him to his feet. His crutch was gone. They forced him to walk on his still healing leg, half dragging him towards the central fire. The pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the terror. The entire village was gathered, a circle of silent, accusing faces, illuminated by the dancing flames. In the center, next to the fire, was a single wooden post driven into the ground. Chaitin stood waiting. He held a long, wicked-looking knife in his hand. This was it. This was how it ended. They tied him to the post, his back pressed against the rough wood. The ropes bit into his wrists. He looked out at the crowd, searching for any sign of mercy. He saw none. He looked at Winona. She stood beside her father, her face a stone mask, but he thought he saw her hand tremble. Or maybe it was just a trick of the firelight. Chaitin stepped forward. He began to speak. His voice was loud, powerful, each word a condemnation. He was telling the story of the Wasichu spy who had tried to lead their enemies to their camp, the story of the liar who had been caught. He was working the crowd into a frenzy. Caleb could hear the anger in their voices as they shouted their agreement. He closed his eyes, bracing for the end. He thought of his parents. He thought of his miserable life in Redemption Creek, a life of loneliness and hunger. Maybe this was better. Maybe it was a relief. He heard a commotion at the edge of the camp. A sentry shouted a warning. The circle of people broke apart as everyone turned to look. A cloud of dust was rising on the horizon, visible even in the dark. Riders, a lot of them, and they were coming fast. Hope, fragile and stupid, flickered in his chest. Was it the cavalry? Had someone from town come for him? Chaitin barked an order. The warriors grabbed their weapons, forming a defensive line. The women and children scrambled for the safety of their teepees. In the chaos, Caleb was forgotten, still tied to the post. The riders burst into the clearing, but it wasn't the cavalry. His heart sank. It was Vance, the prospector, the man who had led the stampede, and he had a dozen men with him, all of them armed to the teeth, their faces flushed with whiskey and rage. "We've come for the boy!" Vance bellowed, his voice slurring slightly. "We know you savages took him. Hand him over." Chaitin stepped forward, his knife still in his hand. "He is not a prisoner," the chief said, his voice dangerously calm. "He is a criminal awaiting judgment." Vance laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Judgment? You're going to kill him, ain't ya? Well, he's one of us. You don't get to kill one of us." A man next to Vance raised his rifle. "Let's just take him back," he yelled. Caleb's mind was reeling. This was insane. The men who had tried to kill him were now here to save him? It made no sense. Vance was a coward and a brute. Why would he risk his life for the orphan boy he'd left for dead? Then he saw it. The look in Vance's eyes as he stared at Caleb. It wasn't concern. It wasn't righteousness. It was pure, unadulterated fear. Vance wasn't here to save Caleb. He was here to silence him. Caleb was the only witness, the only one who could tell the world what really happened at the creek. That Vance and his men had ridden down an unarmed girl and left a boy to die. They hadn't come back to Redemption Creek and confessed. They had come back and lied. They had told the town that the Lakota had attacked them and kidnapped the boy. They had made themselves the heroes. And now, their lie was about to be exposed, because there he was, alive. Chaitin saw it too. He was no fool. He saw the fear in Vance's eyes. He saw the lie. He turned his head slowly and looked at Caleb, who was still tied to the post. A flicker of understanding passed between the chief and the boy. For the first time, Chaitin saw the truth. This boy wasn't a spy. He was a victim, just like them. The boy stays, Chayton said, his voice like flint. He has a story to tell, a story about you. Vance's face went white. The drunken bravado evaporated, replaced by cold, sober panic. He's delirious, Vance sputtered. The fever. You've twisted his mind. His mind is clear, Chayton said. He walked over to Caleb and, with a single, swift motion, cut the ropes that bound him. Caleb stumbled forward, his legs weak. He stood between the two groups, the fire at his back. All eyes were on him. The Lakota, their faces now filled with confusion and dawning realization. The prospectors, their faces a mixture of fear and guilt. Tell them, Vance, Caleb said, his voice shaking but clear. Tell them what you did. Tell them how you ran. Vance didn't answer. He just stared at Caleb, his hand hovering over the pistol at his belt. The standoff was a powder keg and Caleb had just lit the fuse. You left me to die, Caleb said, his voice growing stronger with every word. He took a limping step towards Vance's horse. The prospectors shifted uncomfortably. A few of them wouldn't meet his gaze. You and your friends, drunk, reckless. You were racing your horses like children. You didn't even see her. He pointed a trembling finger at Winona, who was watching with wide, shocked eyes. You would have killed her. You would have trampled her into the mud, and you never would have known or cared. Vance's face was turning a blotchy red. Shut up, boy, he snarled. That ain't what happened. It's exactly what happened, Caleb shot back. The fear he'd lived with for weeks was burning away, replaced by a white-hot anger. I pushed her out of the way, and your horse, Vance, your big bay horse, it shattered my leg. Your friends, they rode right over me. Then you all ran. You ran like the cowards you are. A murmur went through the Lakota warriors. They were looking at Caleb differently now, not as an enemy, but as something else. Vance could see he was losing control. His lie was unraveling in front of everyone. He had two choices, retreat in shame or double down on the violence. He chose violence. He drew his pistol. He's a liar! The savages have brainwashed him! He screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. He aimed the gun, not at Chayton, not at the warriors, but at Caleb. He had to erase the truth, but he never got the chance. An arrow, fletched with hawk feathers, materialized in his throat. He made a gurgling sound, his eyes wide with surprise. The pistol dropped from his hand. He clutched at his neck, then toppled sideways from his horse, landing in the dust with a heavy thud. The shot had come from Chayton's bow. The chief hadn't even looked like he was aiming. It was as smooth and natural as breathing. The other prospectors stared in horror at their dead leader. Then they looked at the line of Lakota warriors, all with arrows nocked and aimed directly at their hearts. There was a moment of absolute silence. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the wind whispering through the grass. Then, one by one, the prospectors dropped their rifles. They raised their hands in surrender. They had come for a fight, but their courage was as fake as their story. It had died with Vance. Chayton walked over to Caleb, his face grim. He placed a heavy hand on the boy's shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was one of possession. You spoke the truth, the chief said, his voice low. Truth is a powerful weapon. He turned to face the terrified prospectors. You will take your dead, and you will leave our lands. You will tell your people what happened here. You will tell them the truth. If you lie, we will come for you, and we will not be as merciful as this boy was. The men scrambled to obey. They loaded Vance's body onto his horse and rode away, a pathetic and shamed retreat. They didn't look back. As the sound of their horses faded, a strange quiet fell over the camp. The crisis was over. The tension broke. Caleb's legs finally gave out. He collapsed to his knees, shaking uncontrollably. Winona rushed to his side. She knelt in front of him, her eyes shining with tears. They weren't tears of anger anymore. They were tears of shame. I was wrong, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. You saved me, and I wanted you to die. It's okay, Caleb managed to say, his throat tight. You had every reason to hate me. Chayton watched them for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he walked away, back towards his teepee without another word. The trial was over. Caleb had been judged, not by the chief, but by the actions of his own people. And he had been vindicated. But as he looked around the silent camp, at the faces of the people who had been ready to kill him just minutes before, he felt a new kind of loneliness. He didn't belong with the people of Redemption Creek, but he didn't belong here either. He was caught between two worlds, a ghost once again. He had survived, but he was more alone than ever. The next few days were strange. The open hostility from the Lakota was gone, replaced by a cautious, awkward respect. People would nod at him as he passed. The children, who had once thrown stones at him, now watched him with wide, curious eyes. He was no longer the Wasichu spy. He was Wanbli Kleska, the spotted eagle, a name they had given him that felt heavy and undeserved. He had faced down his own people, spoken the truth, and an enemy had fallen. In their eyes, that made him a warrior. But he didn't feel like a warrior. He just felt tired. Istas, the old medicine woman, now treated his wounds with a gentle touch. She brought him broths that were rich and savory, not bitter. Her face, once a mask of stern duty, now held a hint of a smile. But the distance was still there. He was an outsider, an object of curiosity. He ate alone. He slept in the teepee that was now his alone, but felt more like a cage. No one spoke to him unless they had to. He was a hero, but he was not one of them. Winona was the only one who tried to bridge the gap. She would bring him his food and sit with him while he ate, trying to make conversation in her broken English. She told him about her people, their customs, their beliefs. She was trying to apologize, in her own way, but it was strained. The memory of her accusations, of her hatred, hung between them like a ghost. He appreciated the effort, but it only made him feel more isolated. He was a living reminder of her mistake, a reminder of how close she had come to letting an innocent boy be killed. He spent his time walking, his limp slowly improving. He would wander the edges of the camp, watching the life of the village from a distance. He saw families laughing together around their fires. He saw brothers hunting together. He saw a community, a web of connections so tight and strong that he knew he could never be a part of it. He was a loose thread, forever on the outside. One evening, Chayton sent for him. Caleb entered the chief's teepee with a sense of dread. He had barely seen the man since the night of the confrontation. The chief was sitting by the fire, sharpening the blade of his knife, the same knife he had been holding when he was about to execute Caleb. Sit, Chayton said, gesturing to a pile of furs. Caleb sat. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. My son, Chayton began, his voice soft, not looking up from his work. He was your age when he died. The coughing sickness. It came from a traitor's blanket. A gift. The chief's hands stilled. He looked up, and his eyes bored into Caleb. He was strong, brave. He would have been a great chief, but his body was weak against your sickness. We have learned that the Wasichu bring death, even when they smile, even when they offer gifts. Caleb didn't know what to say. I am sorry for your loss, he said quietly. Chayton gave a short, bitter laugh. Sorrow does not bring back the dead. When you came into our lives, I saw only another bad omen. Another Wasichu who would bring us pain. I saw my son's killer in your face. He set the knife down. I was wrong. I let my grief blind me. I judged you with my heart, not my eyes. That is a mistake a chief cannot afford to make. He paused, his gaze intense. But the problem remains. What is to be done with you? The question hung in the air. It was the question Caleb had been asking himself for days. He couldn't go back to Redemption Creek. The prospectors he had exposed would surely kill him. But he couldn't stay here. He was a constant, uncomfortable presence, a monument to their prejudice and their error in judgment. "I can leave," Caleb offered, his voice barely a whisper. "I can walk until I find another town." "And die in the wilderness?" Chayton shook his head. "No, your death would be a stain on our honor. We saved your life. It now belongs to us. That is our way." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "There is another path, a harder path. You have the heart of a Lakota. You have the courage of a warrior. But your skin is white. Your blood is not our blood. To my people, you will always be an outsider. They will respect you, but they will never love you. They will never see you as a brother." The words were blunt, but they were true. Caleb felt a familiar ache in his chest, the ache of loneliness. It seemed it was his fate, no matter where he went. "There is one way," Chayton said slowly, as if weighing each word. "A way to weave your thread into our blanket, to make your blood our blood." Caleb looked at him, confused. What was he talking about? "You saved my daughter's life," the chief said, his voice dropping. "You offered your life for hers. In our way, that creates a debt that can never be repaid. It creates a bond, a blood bond." He stood up and walked to the entrance of the teepee. He called out a name. "Winona." She entered a moment later, her eyes downcast. She looked nervous. "Winona," Chayton said, his voice taking on a formal, ceremonial tone. "This man, Wanblee Kleska, holds your life in his hands. Our laws are clear. He has a claim on you." Caleb's heart started pounding. A claim on her? What did that mean? Winona looked up, her eyes meeting Caleb's. There was fear in them, and something else. Resignation. "To make you one of us," Chayton said, turning back to Caleb. "To make you my son, you must marry my daughter." The chief's words echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of the teepee. Marry Winona. It was insane. It was a solution so far beyond anything Caleb could have imagined that he couldn't even process it. He looked at Winona. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring at the fire, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. This wasn't a proposal. It was a command, a political solution to a social problem. Chayton was trying to fix his mistake, to restore balance and honor by tying Caleb to their family, to their people, in the most permanent way possible. But it felt wrong. It felt like another kind of prison. "Father," Winona said, her voice small and tight, "is this necessary?" "It is the only way," Chayton replied, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "He cannot leave. He cannot stay as he is. He must become one of us. This is how it will be done." He looked at Caleb. "It is your choice, boy. Accept my daughter, and you will have a home, a family, a people. You will be my son. Refuse, and you will remain a stranger among us. Respected, perhaps. Protected, yes. But always, always alone." The choice was no choice at all. A life of cold, distant respect, or a life of belonging. Even if that belonging was forced, engineered. Even if it meant tying himself to a girl who, just a few days ago, had wished him dead. He thought of the stable loft, the gnawing emptiness of his life in Redemption Creek, the constant, crushing loneliness. Anything was better than that. Anything. He looked at Winona, really looked at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, the resentment, but he also saw a flicker of something else, a shared understanding. She was trapped, just as he was, trapped by tradition, by honor, by the decisions of her father. They were two lonely souls, caught in a trap, not of their own making. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to be lonely together. "I accept," Caleb said, his voice hoarse. The words felt strange in his mouth, like he was speaking a foreign language. Chayton nodded, a look of satisfaction on his face. The problem was solved. He had been a chief, not a father. He had moved the pieces on the board to protect his village. He turned to his daughter. "Go," he said. "Prepare yourself." Winona gave Caleb one last, fleeting look, an unreadable mix of emotions swirling in her dark eyes. Then she turned and hurried out of the teepee. "The ceremony will be in 3 days," Chayton announced. "The whole village will celebrate the joining of our families." He clapped Caleb on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be welcoming but felt heavy, like the closing of a cell door. Caleb stumbled out of the chief's tepee into the cool night air, his mind reeling. He was getting married, to a girl he barely knew, a girl who probably hated him. He had a home, he had a family, he was finally going to belong. So why did he feel more trapped than ever before? The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparations. The women of the village descended upon him. They gave him new clothes, soft deerskin leggings, and a shirt adorned with intricate beadwork. They cut his hair in the Lakota style. They painted symbols on his face and chest, symbols of courage and honor that felt like a costume. He was being transformed, on the outside at least. But on the inside, he was still the same scared, lonely boy. He barely saw Winona. When he did, she was always surrounded by other women, her face a mask of quiet obedience. They never spoke. They never even made eye contact. The distance between them was a chasm, wider and deeper than ever. He was a stranger, and she was his bride. The night of the ceremony, the entire village gathered around the central fire. The drums beat a steady, hypnotic rhythm. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat and wood smoke. It was a celebration, but it felt like a funeral. His funeral. He stood before the fire, dressed in his new clothes, feeling like an imposter. Chayton led Winona to him. She was beautiful. She wore a white doeskin dress, decorated with shells and beads that shimmered in the firelight. Her hair was loose, flowing down her back. But her eyes were empty. She looked like a doll, going through the motions. Chayton joined their hands. Her hand was cold in his. The chief began to chant, his voice rising and falling with the beat of the drums. He was telling the story of their people, of the importance of family, of the joining of 2 spirits into one. The words were beautiful, but they felt hollow, a lie. When the chanting was done, Chayton presented them with a single blanket, woven with the symbols of their 2 families. He wrapped it around their shoulders, binding them together. "You are now one," he declared. The village erupted in cheers. People were singing, dancing. A great feast began. Caleb and Winona were led to a place of honor, but they sat in silence, bound together by the blanket, 2 strangers at their own wedding feast. He felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on them, watching, judging. He was one of them now. He had a wife. He had a father. He had a home. He had everything he had ever wanted. But as he sat there, next to his silent bride, surrounded by the joyous celebration of his new people, Caleb Blackwood had never felt so utterly and completely alone. Their new teepee was set apart from the others, a gift from the chief. It was large and new, furnished with the finest furs and everything they would need. It was a home. But when the celebration was over and they stepped inside, the silence was deafening. Winona moved to one side of the fire, Caleb to the other. They were husband and wife, but they were separated by an invisible wall. For days, they lived like ghosts in the same house. They spoke only when necessary, their words clipped and formal. "The water is low. I will fetch more." They ate their meals in silence. They slept on opposite sides of the teepee, the fire a tiny dying star in the vast darkness between them. Caleb tried. He would ask her questions about her day, about her friends. She would answer in single words, her eyes always averted. He was a constant reminder of her humiliation. A white man, a former enemy, forced upon her as a husband. He could see the resentment in the tight line of her mouth, in the way she flinched if he accidentally brushed against her. The rest of the village treated him with a forced, cheerful acceptance. The men invited him on hunts. He tried his best, but he was clumsy with a bow, slow on the trail. He was a boy who had grown up in a stable, not a warrior of the plains. They were patient with him, but he could feel their pity. He was the chief's son-in-law, a position he had not earned. He was a charity case, just as he had been in Redemption Creek. Only the clothes were different. The loneliness was the same. It was a cold, bitter thing, made worse by the fact that he was surrounded by people. He was an island in the middle of a bustling village. He started taking long walks again, just as he had before. He would leave the camp and walk for hours across the prairie, the vast emptiness a comfort. Out here, he didn't have to pretend. He could just be himself, the scared, broken boy he had always been. One day, he walked further than usual. He found a small, hidden valley cut by a stream. It was peaceful. He sat by the water, skipping stones, his mind a numb blank. He didn't hear her approach. "You should not be out here alone," Winona said. He turned, startled. She was standing a few feet away, a basket in her hands. She had been gathering herbs. "The men from your town? They could come back," she said. "Let them," he said, his voice flat. He didn't care anymore. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw something other than resentment in her eyes. It was concern, genuine concern. She sat down beside him, not too close, but not as far away as usual. "This is not a life," she said quietly, "living like this." "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice raw with a pain he could no longer hide. I'm trying to fit in, but I don't. I'm not one of you. I never will be." "I know," she said, her voice soft. "It is my fault. I have been unkind." He shook his head. "You have every right. Your father forced this on you." "He did it to protect you," she said, "and to protect us. He did what he thought was right, but it was not right for you or for me." They sat in silence for a long time, watching the water flow. It was the first honest moment they had ever shared. "When I was a little girl," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "my mother taught me how to find the star flowers. They only bloom in the moonlight, deep in the woods. We would sneak out of the camp together. It was our secret." She smiled, a sad, faint smile. "She died of the fever 2 winters ago. Your people's fever." The words hung in the air. "I'm sorry," he said. It felt so inadequate. "When I see you," she continued, finally looking at him, "I see all of it. The sickness, the soldiers, the brother I lost, the mother I lost. It is not fair to you, but it is the truth." He finally understood. Her coldness, her resentment. It wasn't just about him. It was about her grief. He was the living symbol of her pain. "And when I see you," he said, finding the courage to speak his own truth, "I see the horses. I see the fear in your eyes. I see how close you came to dying. I see a girl I saved, but who I can never really reach." Her eyes filled with tears. "You did not just save my life," she whispered. "You saved more than that. Something I was carrying." He looked at her, confused. "Carrying? What were you carrying?" She hesitated, looking around as if to make sure they were truly alone. "A map," she said, her voice dropping so low he had to lean in to hear her. "A map to our sacred places, the winter camp, the burial grounds of our ancestors, the valley where the buffalo always return. It is the heart of our people. If the Wasichu found it, they would destroy everything." A cold chill went down Caleb's spine. The prospectors, Vance, they weren't just looking for gold. "That's what they were after," he said, the pieces clicking into place. Vance wasn't just a prospector. He was looking for that map. He had been trying for months, she confirmed, bribing our people, threatening them. I was taking the map to a safe place, to the elders in the mountains. He must have followed me. It all made sense now. The accidental stampede, Vance's desperation to get him back, to silence him. He hadn't just witnessed an assault. He had stumbled into the middle of a war for the very soul of the Lakota people. And his one impulsive act of courage had saved them. But there was a new, terrifying thought. "Do they know the map still exists?" he asked. Winona's face went pale. "I don't know," she whispered. "But if they do, they will be back. And this time, they will not stop until they have it. They will burn this camp to the ground." The fragile peace they had found was shattered. A new threat was looming, darker and more dangerous than before, and they were standing right in its path. They returned to the camp with a new sense of urgency. The silence between them was no longer awkward, it was strategic. They had a shared secret, a shared danger. They went straight to Chayton's teepee. The chief was meeting with his war council, a group of grim-faced senior warriors. He looked surprised to see them enter together. "Father," Winona said, her voice firm, "we must talk." She explained everything. The map, Vance's true motives. The possibility that more men would come, not just a drunken mob, but a calculated armed force. As she spoke, Caleb watched the faces of the warriors. Their expressions hardened. This was the news they had been fearing, the final push by the Wasichu to erase them from the land. When she was finished, the teepee was silent. Chayton stared into the fire, his face a mask of deep thought. "The boy was right," one of the warriors said, his voice a low growl. "Vance was not just a coward, he was a snake." "And a snake's head is never far from its body," another added. "There are others. They will not give up so easily." Chayton finally looked up. He looked at Caleb. "You have brought this danger to our doorstep, Wasichu," he said, his voice cold. The old suspicion was back. "No," Winona said, stepping in front of Caleb, shielding him. "He did not bring it. He stopped it. He saved us. Now we must finish it." Her defiance surprised everyone, including Caleb. She had never spoken to her father like that before. Chayton looked at his daughter, then back at Caleb. He saw the new bond between them, a bond forged not by ceremony, but by a shared truth. He gave a slow nod. "My daughter is right. We have been waiting for the wolf to show its teeth. Now it has." He stood up, his presence filling the teepee. "We will not wait for them to come to us. We will take the fight to them. We will go back to that town of thieves, and we will cut the head off the snake for good." A plan was formed. A small war party, led by Chayton himself, would ride to Redemption Creek, but not for a battle, for a different kind of war, a war of truth. Caleb was the key. He was their weapon. He knew the town. He knew the people. And most importantly, he knew who Vance had been working for. "Mr. Donovan," Caleb said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. "The livery owner, the man I worked for. He was always meeting with strangers, men in suits from back east. Vance was one of them. Donovan paid him. I saw it." The pieces were all there. Donovan wasn't just a livery owner. He was a land agent, using men like Vance to drive the Lakota off their land so he could sell it to the railroad or the government. The map was the final piece he needed to claim it all. The plan was risky. They would ride into town, not as warriors, but as something else. They would walk directly into the lion's den, into Donovan's livery, and Caleb would be the bait. The night before they were to leave, Winona came to him as he was checking the saddle on his horse. "You do not have to do this," she said, her voice quiet. "This is not your fight." "It is now," he said, turning to face her. In the moonlight, he could see the worry in her eyes. "They will kill you." "They'll have to try," he said. He was scared, terrified, but for the first time in his life he wasn't running from something. He was fighting for something. For these people. For her. She reached out and touched the beadwork on his shirt, the pattern her own mother had designed. "My father was wrong," she whispered. "Your skin may be white, but your heart is Lakota." She leaned in and kissed him. It was a soft, hesitant kiss, but it was real. It was not the kiss of a stranger, but of a wife. In that moment, the wall between them crumbled into dust. He finally understood. Home wasn't a place. It wasn't a teepee or a stable loft. It was this feeling, this connection, this woman standing in front of him. "Come back to me," she said, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I will," he promised. He rode out the next morning with Chayton and 10 warriors at his side. They were a strange sight, a Lakota war chief and his painted warriors riding peacefully behind a skinny white boy. As they crested the hill overlooking Redemption Creek, the town looked just as he'd left it. Dirty, dusty, and mean. But something inside him had changed. He was no longer the invisible orphan boy who slept in the stables. He was Wanblee Kleska. He was the son of a chief. He was the husband of the bravest woman he had ever known. He was going home to finish a war. They rode down the main street of Redemption Creek in broad daylight. People stopped and stared, their mouths agape. They saw a Lakota war party, and they saw a boy they all recognized as the stable orphan, dressed as one of them. Fear and confusion rippled through the town. Doors slammed shut. Windows were shuttered. They rode straight to the livery. Mr. Donovan was standing outside, a look of pure shock on his face. When he saw Caleb, his shock turned to a sickly, pale fear. He knew exactly what this meant. "Caleb," he stammered, what is the meaning of this?" "You know what it means, Donovan," Caleb said, his voice cold and steady. He dismounted, Chayton and the others fanning out behind him, a silent, intimidating wall of strength. "It's over." Donovan started to back away, his eyes darting around, looking for an escape. I don't know what you're talking about." "Vance talked," Caleb lied, his voice ringing with authority. "Before he died. He told us everything. About you, the land agents, the map. He told us how you paid him to get it." Donovan's face crumbled. The lie had hit its mark. "He's lying!" Donovan shouted to the faces peering from behind curtains. "The savages have poisoned his mind." Chayton took a step forward. He was unarmed, but his presence was more powerful than any weapon. "We have not come for war," the chief said, his voice calm and deep, carrying across the silent street. "We have come for justice. This man," he pointed a long finger at Donovan, "is a thief and a murderer. He tried to steal our land, the land given to us by the Great Spirit and by your own treaties. He sent men to kill my daughter. He is the reason for the blood that has been shed." The town marshal, a portly man with a drooping mustache, finally found his courage and bustled forward. "Now see here, Chief," he started. "You can't just ride into town and make accusations." "Ask him," Caleb cut in, his eyes locked on Donovan. "Ask him where he got the money for this new livery. Ask him about the letters he gets from the railroad company in Chicago. Ask him why a simple stable owner has land deeds for half the territory in his safe." The marshal hesitated. He looked at Donovan, who was sweating profusely. The people of Redemption Creek were not good people, but they were not fools. They knew Donovan was crooked. They had just never cared, as long as it didn't affect them. But now, a Lakota war party was in their street, and it was affecting them. Donovan made a break for it. He turned and ran into the dark interior of the livery. "He's going for the deeds!" Caleb shouted. 2 of Chayton's warriors were faster. They moved like shadows, intercepting Donovan before he could reach his office. They dragged him back out into the sunlight, kicking and sputtering. The safe was opened, and it was all there. The letters, the forged deeds. the proof of a massive conspiracy to illegally seize Lakota land. It was all laid out in the dusty street for the whole town to see. Donovan, exposed and ruined, started screaming, his voice a high-pitched whine of pure hatred. "They're savages, all of them! This boy is a traitor to his own kind! We should hang them all!" But no one was listening to him anymore. They were looking at the evidence. They were looking at the calm, dignified chief who had not raised a single weapon. And they were looking at the orphan boy they had never truly seen before, who now stood with a quiet strength that shamed them all. Justice had come to Redemption Creek, not with bullets or arrows, but with the simple, undeniable power of the truth. Chayton placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. "You have done well, my son," he said, his voice filled with a pride that warmed Caleb to his very soul. They tied Donovan up and left him for the marshal, who now had no choice but to arrest him. As they mounted their horses to leave, the people of the town watched them go in a stunned silence. They had feared the Lakota for years, seeing them as monsters. But today, the only monster they had seen was one of their own. As they rode out of the town, leaving the dust and the greed and the hatred behind, Caleb took one last look back. It was the place he had been born, the place he had suffered, but it held no power over him anymore. He turned his horse and rode towards the open prairie, towards the clean air, towards the woman he loved, towards home. The return to the village was triumphant. Winona was waiting for him at the edge of the camp. When she saw him, she ran to him, and he swung down from his horse and lifted her into his arms. The whole village cheered. That night, there was another great celebration. But this one was different. It was not forced, it was real. Caleb sat by the fire, his wife's hand in his, and he was not an outsider. He was one of them. He was a hero. He was home. Late that night, after the celebration had wound down, he and Chayton sat alone by the fire, just as they had before. "The fight is not over," the chief said, his voice quiet. "There will be other Donovans, other Vances. They will not stop trying to take our land, our way of life." "I know," Caleb said, "but now we will be ready for them." Chayton smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Yes," he said, "we will. You have given us a new weapon, Caleb. You have shown us that the Wasichu can be fought not just with arrows, but with their own laws, their own truths. You are a bridge between our worlds." He looked at Caleb, his eyes shining with a deep paternal love.
"I lost a son born of my blood, but the Great Spirit has given me a new son. A son born of courage, a son with a Lakota heart." Caleb felt tears welling in his eyes. The last of the old pain, the last of the loneliness, was finally washed away. He was no longer Caleb Blackwood, the orphan. He was Wanblee Kleska, the spotted eagle, son of Chayton, husband of Winona, a warrior of the Lakota people. He had walked through the fire, and he had been reborn. His life had been a long, lonely trail, but it had finally led him here. Under the endless, star-dusted sky of the prairie, he was finally, completely, home. It's a crazy world out there, and sometimes the people you're told to fear are the only ones you can trust, and the place you're told to call home is just a cage in disguise. What do you think? Was Caleb right to turn his back on his own people? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, and you want to hear more tales of justice, survival, and the strange twists of fate, do me a solid and hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it.